One of the principles in interpreting history requires us to judge history according to its time, to its culture, and the context of that situation. Unfortunately, today, the modern contemporary man has a total disregard for history. We tend to judge the past acts of people using today's norms and today's context. This is not respecting history, because what is considered right in the past, of course, today as humanity becomes more civilized, we will certainly not do those things that were perhaps permissible in the past. And therefore, this principle of judging history according to its time is a very important principle when we want to discern the will of God in our lives today. So if we take today's first reading from the book of Maccabees, we have Matthias. What is your response actually to this long reading of the book of Maccabees? Would you consider Matthias a great hero, very honorable, to stand by his faith and to give up all his possessions in order to flee to the countryside or to the desert, so that they continue this battle against the kings and his soldiers? If we read the book of Maccabees, from this basis, certainly we can see Matthias really an honorable man. He refused to take bribes. He was not concerned about being respected or being rewarded, as the commissioner told him, with gold and silver and many presents. He was insistent on preserving the law and being faithful to his law and to the law and to the religion. So this fidelity of Matthias and all those people who followed him certainly is to be admired. But then sometimes when we want to stand up for justice, we can allow our anger against injustice to take over our own rational reason, so to speak. When we allow our anger to control our lives, our emotions to control us, then sometimes, even when we are fighting for justice, it can also be lack of charity, so to speak. So in this case here, protective of the law, that when he saw one of his men offering sacrifice, he killed him immediately. And then, of course, he killed the commissioner, soldiers, and everybody else. Of course, today we won't do such a thing. I hope so. Perhaps some fanatical believers might do such thing, but today, if we do such a thing, certainly it is not in line with today's gospel. Because, again, in today's gospel, we have Jesus weeping for his own people. Because the people wanted independence from the Romans. But actually, they were given a certain amount of freedom to govern themselves, the temple. They had freedom of worship, so to speak. Not perfectly, but they have sufficient freedom. But they wanted to have full independence from the Romans to restore the grandiose glory of the kingdom of David. And so they were stirring up rebellions. And at the end of the day, Jesus saw that the people were responding not with humility, not with the right frame of mind, instead stirring up violence, just like the zealots, the revolutionaries, waiting to drive out the Romans. Of course, at the end of the day, the Romans were so powerful, and Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. Or was totally burnt to the ground, so to speak, in the ruins. And Jesus, who had the foresight, said, if only you recognize the opportunity when God offered you. Jesus was realistic. He was able to see the consequences of what will happen if the people continue to be arrogant and to make their demands accepted. instead of working some compromise. There are things, I suppose, and every leader, and I suppose it is true for Matthias, every leader, we face a dilemma, actually, and it's not easy to be a leader. As a leader, it's not a question of sometimes doing right thing, wrong thing. We all know what is right, what is wrong. But sometimes things are gray, and not sometimes, I think many times things are rather gray. It's not to simply say we should do this, because there are other factors to consider. And this is true, especially when we are a leader. Of course, a leader's principle has to be clear, just like Matthias. Clearly that we do not use leadership for our own vested interests, not to gain material wealth, and certainly a leader has to stand by the principles that he is advocating or the organization that he is called to serve. We need to stand by our principles. And so this is where a lot of prudence is important, a lot of humility, a lot of patience. And that is why it is important, as Jesus reminds us, as leaders, we need to be discerning. We need to recognize the visitation when God offers it. We need to look at how the Lord is asking us to respond accordingly in today's time. And so we need to really, as leaders, have to be discerning. We cannot be rash. And I know, especially those of us who are leaders, especially we are the head of the department or the head of an organization, and then, your higher boss asks you to do things you think it's not reasonable to your staff, and your staff has been working so hard for you, and the boss says, these fellows are useless. I mean, you wouldn't agree. You do not know the staff have been working with me. So we also feel the need to defend and to protect those people who have worked alongside with us. And so all these things have been done in a very prudent manner. We pray that leaders will be discerning. Otherwise, the consequences will be great.